Good afternoon and very warm welcome to everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Onik Nandi. He has completed his PhD in Applied Linguistics, which he completed as a James Watt Scholar at Heroed Watt University, Edinburgh in 2016. Onik is currently working as a research fellow at the Social Linguistics Seminar of a Royal Galician Academy of Language, Spain, in a social linguistics project that investigates the impact of language policy in intergenerational transmission of Galician. In December 2019, Nandi finished his first postdoctoral as a research fellow at Queen's University, Belfast, Northern Ireland, United Kingdom, where he studied language policies and practice in relation to immigrants and community language in Northern Ireland and Scotland. Before joining Queen's University, he was directly involved in language planning with regard to the Galician language and acted in an advisory capacity to the General Directorate of Language Policy in Galicia, Spain. Dr. Nandi has published mainly in three areas of applied linguistics: critical social linguistics, translation, Galician and Bengali, and second language acquisition. He writes academic as well as non-academic articles in four languages simultaneously, including English, Spanish, Galician, and Bengali, to feed into applied linguistic scholarship in different languages. His research papers have appeared in various prestigious national and international journals in the field of such as multilingual language policy, language and migration, so on. In addition to his current role at the Royal Galician Academy of Language, Dr. Nandi also enacts as an external research collaborator at the Research Center attached to the UNESCO Chair on World Language Heritage at the University of the Basque Country, Spain. He is an associate fellow at the United Kingdom Higher Education Academy, United Kingdom, and an active member of British Association of Applied Linguistics. So now, session over to you, Dr. Nandi.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me over for this very nice webinar at this outset of coronavirus that we all are suffering from. So first of all, my sincere regards who are really the organizers. Obviously, Professor Singh, I would like to send my specific regards to you because I became a sociolinguist studying some of your articles when I was doing my starting my MPhil research back in Spain. So yeah, so since then it's a long road, but yeah. Now in this topic today, do you want me to go ahead and start the presentation, Gulab?
Yeah.
Yes, as you choose. I mean, if you want to give an introduction to the whole area, you can choose to do that.
I will just start like a bit of a like quick review of the research area that I'm working on, but based on more of this critical perspective, which happens to be the title of my talk. And then I will center on two case studies, which will be on Galicia, which is my doctoral research. And then there will be a short case study, which is still under process at present, which is in Northern Irish context. And then after that, we may, in the discussion part, we can talk about how these scenarios and the minority language situations are quite common in these areas. And also we can compare it to the Indian context accordingly. So I'll start with my presentation here. So what do we understand as a language policy? Well, broadly speaking, I understand the language policy. I will start with a more of a broad definition here. So language policy in a broad sense could be understood as any decision or choice made about languages by certain actors, such as a state, community, or an individual. So it can be considered also like, in other words, it would be like an act of prioritization, namely the relative ranking of languages based on certain criteria, such as efficiency or symbolic value. To begin with, I will just also, okay, yeah. So the language policy as a discipline started immediately after the Second World War as a part of applied linguistics, obviously. And early language policy scholarship, which we call in policy research as a neoclassical era that lasted from 1950 to 1990, that centered mostly on resolving the language conflicts of newly emerging post-colonial nations in Africa, in Southeast Asia, through developing macro level frameworks of policy. Then there was like a wave of critical research on language policy, because the researchers, they're influenced by the canons of critical theory such as Althusser, Gramsci, Foucault, Bourdieu, and started interrogating these macro level frameworks, firstly for ignoring the role of human agency in language policy processes, and also for neglecting the socio-political context in which these languages are planned. So the next level, what I would like to talk about is how top-down language policy and critical language policy researchers found the connection between these top-down policies with sociolingual inequity. So critical researchers found also, like they also underscored that the government policymaker tend to underscore the interest of the dominant social groups, marginalize the minority languages, and thus try to perpetuate the systems of sociolingual inequity. They employ a range of policy devices that are most often are in control of power, such as the public administration, education, religion, mass media, to influence people's linguistic daily lives. Or, for example, education requires a special mention here, because the educational policies are often serve as a key instrument in manipulating and imposing language behaviors, as every child in a welfare state must attend school. So top-down ideologies in education are often visible through the curriculum, the textbooks, and the other teaching learning related materials. So my center of research has always been the intersection between the top-down and bottom-up policies. So what are the bottom-up policies then? Because the micro or grassroots level actors in these policies, such as the parents, teachers, and other members of the civil society, for whom the policy is planned or designed, also play a significant role in interpreting and implementing these policies on the ground. These actors, if they are disillusioned with the top-down language policies, may create their own language agenda and may resist from the ground, from a bottom-up perspective. This formulation of their own language agenda may take place within the family, within the classroom, at the school, or at the community level. So my next option is I would like to talk about the family, because where I did my research mostly, because it's how family is important in language policy processes. So research in multilingual families is now a well-established domain due to several researchers for over the almost 100 years of research tradition about bilingualism and bilingual families and their interpretation of what language they should choose and what language practice they should do, all these kind of things. So family language policy in this regard is emerged as an independent field of inquiry only in the last decade, because if we see that the first article about family language policy as such is published in 2008. So family language policy refers to the overt choices that parents make about language use inside the family, and some implicit practices that legitimize certain linguistic practices over the others at home. For example, I would like to give an example here. I was interviewing a father. He was saying that when we have our dinner, we should speak Galician, because if somebody speaks Spanish, so there will be a big discussion on it. So things like that. So where the parents decide through their choices and their practices what language should be the language of instruction at home or communication. My research is mainly based on ethnographic and discourse analytical tools, and I investigated mostly the complex association between the governmental policies and how these policies are interpreted, appropriated, and implemented, and in some cases negotiated by a diverse range of social actors in everyday context, opening up ideological spaces to use or non-use of certain languages in multilingual societies. One very important factor that I would like to mention here, that any language policy, whether it's top down or it is bottom up, any language policy will always have three independent, albeit interconnected factors. They are language ideology, language practice, and obviously language planning, which is what's called in Spolskian terms as language management. So language ideology, obviously you all know that it's not only about languages, it's more about other factors, historical and social development related factors such as citizenship, somebody's what context they are, and things like that. So why using ethnographic tools in language policy? Because while researching language policy, critical researchers pointed out that language policy is a multi-layered process. In this multi-layered process, Nancy Hornberger and Ricento in 1996 compared the policy process as a metaphorical onion. And if we want to know how these different layers of this metaphorical policy onion is communicating with each other, we need to slash this onion ethnographically. So in policy research, qualitative ethnographic research tools such as observation, interviews, and focus groups, the main factors actually, allow us to understand the everyday situated practices of different social actors and how these languages, how their language choices interacted with the government policies. So there is a continuous communication. So what happens that sometimes in qualitative research, the truth is sometimes can be mediated. For example, when we interview someone, he or she may not be, he could claim or she could claim that I do certain language practices, and in reality, he or she may not do that same practice. So in my own context of research, where in Galicia specifically, where I investigated the families and their language choices and their language policies at home, I had to choose because I couldn't be present everywhere in when these practices are taking place. So I included kind of a audit to support my observation, interviews, and focus groups. What I call as a family language audit, which is involving observation checklist and various different short self-recorded audio footages of parent-child informal interactions with parents. By parents themselves. So my first case study will be in Galicia. Well, I stayed in Galicia between 2008 and 12, learned the language. I was part of a program, TV program, which allowed me to go to different corners of Galicia and learn about their culture, their language ideologies, in general, their linguistic culture, as Harold Schiffman called it, as linguistic culture. So language activism and media exposure was the next, because I was a language activist there. So then my research took place from 2011 to 15 when I collected my data. I visited several times. So I tried to follow the perspective of way of seeing and way of viewing in both forms as an ethnographer. So I would like to play a short video. Can you hear me, all of us?
Yeah.
So I'll just turn on a small video as part of my program, so that you can have a look at how it started.
Por esta pista empieza una viaje por una das zonas mais salvaxes e máis bonitas da Costa de Morte. A Costa de Camariñas é ben coñecida polas súas paisaxes totalmente naturais. Berni, un veciño, prometeu levarme a lugares que só coñece a xente da zona. Este é o Faro Cabo.
Such exposure also helped me to understand that how their language ideologies interact and how they perceive their language and things related to it. So this is more or less the map of Spain, and you can see that this is the Galicia where I am currently now, and I'm talking to you. And this is the region where the Galician language is spoken. Like any other multilingual countries, there will always be a language hierarchy. So in the Spanish context, we can see that Spanish is on the top, and then you have the co-official languages, which includes Galician. Then we have Basque and Catalan, Balearic, Valencian, and the Aranese language. Then there are some recognized languages such as Asturian and Aragonese. And then there we have this indigenous unofficial languages and different varieties of Spanish. And at the bottom of the power structure, there are the immigrant languages, which are Arabic, Punjabi, Chinese, Bulgarian, Ukrainian, and other European languages. So this is more or less the multilingual scenario of Spain. When we center in Galicia, Galicia is a co-official language of the state along with Spanish or Castilian Spanish, and we have around 3 million people who speak the Galician language. Around 41% of the Galicia's population speak Galician as their L1. There is a continuous language shift since the first the survey was taken into consideration in early 90s, and there is a continuous fall of L1 speakers of Galician, and approximately right now around 31% are Castilian speakers. Another 25% claim that they brought up speaking both the languages. So what is the socio-linguistic milieu of Galicia? In Galicia, the interaction between the social and symbolic capital manifests an intangible prestige afforded to Castilian. So last 30 years of language policy in Galicia remained mainly anodyne, what we call as a low intensity model of language policy with a non-interventionist approach, which is mostly there is a policy in paper, but no implementation on the ground. Then the right-wing government of Galicia in 2010, they brought around another new decree, which allows the preschool students the parents to select language of medium of instruction should be the home language of the children. So the majority of children in the urban context in Galicia already speak Spanish at home, which automatically makes this language instruction it as a language of instruction in urban schools. And what happens that after this, within a 5-year time, there is a huge decrease of L1 Galician speakers among children, 5 to 15 years. So since then, that's the point where I started my research. And what happens here that this really caused a huge uproar in the media. So the stakeholders of the government came up and said that they're offering Galician in the school system. So it's the only place where it is not spoken, it's at home. So they really push the ball to the parents. And that's the point when I started my research to interview the pro-Galician parents to know what their language practices are at home and how the situations, how they face it. So my research questions were in my PhD was like, do the parents create visible or invisible language policies at family domain in a context where the Castilian Spanish is a linguistic custodian? If yes, what kind of strategies do they individually and or collectively use to contest the conventionalization of Spanish language in the Galician society, which holds already a strong power in this context? So what are the factors that are responsible for success or failure of these policies? So here I will offer you a short overview of one case study of a family. It's called Elena is a mom and Virgilio is a father. So Elena is a journalist and Virgilio is an engineer. I should mention here because I focus mainly on parents in context of urban, semi-urban areas. So the group of people I was looking at, they were public service employees, or they belong to a more or less the middle class of Galicia, urban middle class, and what the linguistic practices are. So they are married with 2 children. They have got one eldest son and they have got one youngest. Both of them are studying in cooperative funded Galician medium schools in Santiago. Their home language is Galician because both the parents, they are strongly in favor of Galician, and both parents speak Galician in their day-to-day life. The children speak mostly peers, they mostly speak Spanish, but the children, when they speak to their peers, they speak in Spanish, but they use Galician at home. So we talked about the family language audit. So I have got a short audio recording here just for an idea how it was to understand that what they have stated in the interview is correct or not. I use these audio recordings.
Andaba en la iglesia. No escuches como Matilde. Matilde por la esquina. Se lo acordaba.
Well, something similar. So what kind of strategies these parents use? So when I talked to Virgilio, he said that one of the major factors, which is also common in the case of other pro-Galician parents, they focus a lot on the prestige and identity planning at home. So Virgilio talks about his own experience when he finds that Bruno, his son, sometimes he comes back home and feels very uncomfortable because most of his classmates speak Spanish. And they often make fun of him for speaking Galician because of the symbolic value of Castilian is so high. Galician still to be considered after 30 years of language planning, a language with less cultural and social value. So in such circumstances, they say that they prefer talking to him about explaining him things about that is a part of his identity and he shouldn't renounce it at any cost. So this kind of sentimental support, according to him, helps him to combat the situation outside, the hostile environment outside their house towards Galician. So he says that he knows that Galician is our home language and we frequently chat with him about the linguistic coexistence in Galicia. Another point is creating Galician medium schools. And at Santiago de Compostela, there are two of them, like Rayola, which means the ray of sunshine, and Escola Semente, which means seed school. These two schools are created and funded by a pro-Galician collective. Mostly, many of them are parents who want their kids to learn the language at school, and they try to use the education system. Since the education system of the government is invisibilizing the Galician language in its classrooms, these parents created Galician medium schools so that their kids could learn the language in their early years. So coming back to another point, which is another interesting perspective that I find, Elena forms a part of a WhatsApp group. I analyzed this from the perspective of linguistic governmentality. So governmentality is a concept from Foucault, who says that human behavior is rule governed. So these parents, through their language management, what I talked about, the language planning perspective that they have at home, they try to control their children's language use, because they go to a Galician medium school. All they needed, because many other parents in other focus groups already told me that how their kids get ridiculed for speaking in Galician. So they tried to offer a safe environment to their children. That's why what these parents, such as Elena's, and with other parents who are interested their kids to communicate in Galician, they organized a WhatsApp group, and they tried to control their language practices in this way. And as they have seen it, it's like most of the children will communicate in Spanish outside, and there would be language shift would be more evident in this context. So they made a WhatsApp group so that their younger sons, friends, so that they could socialize in Galician, and this way they could sustain the language shift in certain ways. So the first concluding remarks here would be like, obviously the Castilian still retains a greater degree of symbolic value in the urban Galicia, creating fluctuation and inconsistencies in the form where the children continue speaking Spanish in other contexts outside home. So obviously their desired language practices are not the same as they wanted. Like they wanted their kids to speak Galician all the way. which is not happening. And also in the communities such as Galicia, the coexistence of these native speakers are shrinking due to continuous language shift. So there is an intergenerational gap of language transmission. So these parents trying to occupy an important role in language revitalization processes on the ground, and they are trying to develop bottom-up family language policies of resistance. And well, now there is a big question whether they will be successful or not. Obviously, it's not that easy in that context. So however, it is still to be ascertained that whether these parents can restore the process of intergenerational transmission in Galicia, especially in the home domain and within the community, which could create new generations of speakers. In some cases, I found that certain parents who are very pro-Galician and very much activist, language activists, whom I got to know through my own activism in Galicia, they say that in the initial years, although they get it that their kids could speak the language, but at the end of the day, they shift to Spanish as soon as they understand that they are speaking a different language from their peers. So my next case study, which is more based on my postdoctoral research, would be on Northern Ireland. So obviously, multilingualism in UK is a reality which we all have researched about and heard about. More than 600 languages are spoken in the UK. But obviously, the hierarchical structure is also very similar, as you can see here. English is on the top, then we have indigenous minority languages with official status or some status in some contexts, such as the minority language such as Wales, Scottish Gaelic, British Sign Language. All of them are considered as minorities, obviously. And then we have the Irish Gaelic in Northern Ireland, Scots in Scotland, other minority languages such as Manx and Cornish, Ulster Scots. And then we have what I wanted to reach is these two areas where I did my research mainly, languages of established and economically stable important immigrant communities such as Chinese, Polish, Pakistani, and Indian as well, some Urdu-speaking families and Arabic-speaking people. And there are other migrant languages who are in the bottom of the power structure that are not that organized, people coming from Africa or Vietnam or Sorani, which is a Persian language. So what is the dominant top-down ideology at present? So I could cite directly from the Prime Minister's last, like one of his interventions, he mentioned that there are parts of our country and parts of London still, other cities as well, where English is not spoken by some people as their first language, and that needs to be changed. This kind of authority and trying to govern everybody's linguistic practices, even at home, is an audacity that we can see that they have this kind of perspective. So under these circumstances, I'm trying to look at what the situation is in Northern Ireland. So the immigrant languages in Northern Ireland, especially Chinese and the Indians, can be considered the longest established ethnic minorities in Northern Ireland since the 1950s onwards. Basically, first Indian, then came the Chinese people. And many of us here in the talk definitely know about the situation of troubles in Northern Ireland, which really caused that nation as like a bit of that island, a bit of a problem for during like almost 30 years. So like in the context of this time, in that time of trouble, the translational migration was slowed down, mostly nil in certain contexts. But it regained again the momentum when several Eastern European countries formed part of European Union in 2004. And currently there is almost like from 2008 to 12, there is a 72% increase of newcomer or immigrant students in the schools. And currently there are more than 15,000 immigrant people, who speak around 90 different languages in this Northern Irish schools. That's the context where I started my research. And the language legislation is a very important fact. Obviously, the Belfast Agreement of 1998 clearly accepts that and states that that these immigrant languages are part of this continent. So definitely these languages should be promoted and supported. But there is no official language policy in Northern Ireland. Obviously, Irish medium education, due to last interventions and Good Friday Agreement, enjoys certain type of protection in the school, because there are around 22 schools at present that offer this Irish medium education in Northern Ireland. So teaching learning of heritage languages or these immigrant languages often take place outside mainstream schooling through supplementary schools, what we also know as Saturday schools or community schools, which are often supported through grassroots level community organizations, charities, or particular religious groupings. For example, I did my field work in the Indian Community Center, and they used to organize classes of various South Indian languages, and also of Hindi or Gujarati. And Punjabi is also taught in the Gurdwara. And it is very much in a voluntary basis. So what I did, along with all the research methods that I have used previously, doing focus group with parents and doing individual interviews and focus group with teachers, and also observation was a very important part of any ethnographic research. And I also did family language audit with the parents whom I previously interviewed. Then finally, I also included, like, to observation, I try to use storytelling as a tool. This multilingual storytelling that I personally also, because I could speak various languages, so I organized it with other storytellers in the UK, and we organized these kind of events to promote diversity and inclusion. It really affected several ways. This immigrant students' mentality towards their own languages, because many of them have this fear of speaking, of being excluded from their friends group, so they generally didn't use their languages. There is a long silence period sometimes that has been mentioned by the teachers, and then finally they start speaking the language, as it occurs in many other contexts we know. So I use multilingual storytelling as a form of data collection, and also a form of intervention as a ethnographer. So that way I could manage to get an access what kind of practices these kids have and what kind of ideologies they maintain, things like that. But it was not my the main intention was to organize in the school certain activities with related to multilingualism and diversity and inclusion. So I'll go to two data related facts. For example, I do remember that how the language governance works in the class. So I did some, I do have some field notes here, because I remember there was, like, Ali is an Arabic speaking boy, and when I went there, I had a chance to follow him on that day from different classes, because the teachers complained that Ali's English is not good enough now, because although he had a good level of English in the beginning of the course, and then after the summer vacation his English level is low. So they were trying to offer him specific lessons and trying to offer him English words and things like that. So I was just accompanying Ali in different classes. Then the final class was a numeracy class, where the students were asked to use reach 6 using any two numbers between 1 and 6. And when Ali was called on the board, he started writing this this number, which happens to be an Arabic number, as you can see later. He was immediately stopped by the teacher, and she erased Ali's writing and corrected it to be a 3 and wrote 3 + 3 6 on the board. Ali looked slightly confused, and then he repeated what the numbers were on the board. And I got back home and then I checked it. It's a 4 in Arabic. Maybe he was trying to reach 4 + 2 6, not like 3 + 3 6. But this whole concept of eraser, erase, like as if what his thoughts were about his own language. What kind of negotiations we come across? Obviously, I interview these parents, and these parents are coming from more of a middle class background, and both of them are multilinguals, because Shoel is a Catalan Spanish speaking person and also speak English, because he's a class teacher. He's a high school teacher in Northern Ireland, and his wife Constance, she is also a person who is a biology teacher and speaks French and Spanish and English. So they definitely, with their additive bilingualism perspective, they never stopped speaking the language. As he mentions here, that the principal told him that because his son speaks mostly Spanish or French, so they should stop speaking their home language as just only speak English all the time. So obviously they didn't follow that rule, but this may not be the case with the other parents, as we can see. So the preliminary findings that I had, they are like the immigrant languages are often seen as a problematic barriers in acquisition of English and social integration, obviously. And acquisition of modern foreign languages are often come before the community languages in certain school contexts. Home language maintenance is often seen as a responsibility of parents, and heritage language shift is quite prominent among these immigrant children. To finally, I find also a very interesting fact, which is quite common in both these contexts, a multimodal arbitration between discourses of power, ideology, and language is played out on daily basis through various actors such as educators, pupils, immigrant students, and parents and their parents, who are continuously implicated in a constantly fluctuating field of negotiation. So I will stop it here and follow up with questions.
Session is open for questions. So you can write your questions on the chat box or questions box.
Did I meet my time,
Meanwhile,
more or less?
meanwhile,
Yeah.
yes, you did, Dr. Nandi. It was very good, very comprehensive. Meanwhile, as the people are writing down their questions, let me make a small comment on the comparison that we can easily find with the situations that you mentioned. In little different kind of space, India is little different in comparison to the areas that you have highlighted. Everybody is an Indian here, and yet the situation is that there are places, Konkani speaking community, where initially people were very scared to talk in Konkani. They are reprimanded for speaking in Konkani. They should really speak in Marathi if they want to do well. Similarly, in a situation in Bihar, two Maithils meeting each other on a formal context cannot open up dialogue or conversation in Maithili. They must converse in Hindi. Until a time came when Maithili got recognition from the constitution, and therefore everybody, even in the secretariat, I find on the verandas, the Babu speaking in Maithili without any hesitation. I was very surprised to see what official top-down decisions, how they can really change the entire bottom situation. So this is very interesting. You have pointed out a clash of top-down and bottom-up policy planning approaches vis-a-vis languages, and that is something which I think is a take-up from this today's talk, including the surveys that you have had, particularly in Northern Ireland as well as in Galician situation. I'm sure those among our faculty members who are familiar with Spain would know the situation, that this is very different in the Catalan areas, where the Catalans feel extremely proud to speak in their own language at the cost of Spanish, even in formal occasions. When I have myself, in several cases, several times when I have given talks, and I had an interpreter who was supposed to be taking care of both Catalan and Spanish, he would be really giving full force on Catalan rather than on Spanish in interpreting what I'm speaking on. So this happens, and within the same space like Spain, how different areas behave little differently is a very interesting situation that Nandi represented. So if there are other questions and answers, maybe Gulabchan can read them out.
Yeah, there is a one question like apart from schools and colleges asking to use English, is there some social stigma in Ireland?
Social stigma
Well,
about
Should I
speaking in
repeat?
one's own language, right?
Yeah.
what? Sorry, I
Apart
didn't get the
apart
question.
from schools and colleges, yeah, apart from schools and colleges asking to use English, is there some social stigma in Ireland?
Well, depends on how you want to see it. For example, the social stigma was associated with Irish for a long time. Definitely, I start with Irish, which happens to be the most indigenous minority language in the context of Ireland, and most often it was considered as a part of IRA, which happens to be at within inverted comma for some people it's a terrorist organization. So quite often that language also was associated with language activism and terrorism. But over the past years, and there is a huge conflict going on. My next paper is coming out in current issues in language planning, and there we'll be talking about how these languages are mismatched in different contexts. But definitely there was a social stigma towards Irish in the beginning, and then now since any language at the context where there is English, such a dominant and a global language, is always facing the same kind of threat. Speaking about my own research, where I found that, for example, I was interviewing a Hindi-speaking father who was saying that it's very difficult to convince their kids to continue speaking it because there is an utmost level of racism is there with because I found like I did 3 focus groups with Indian parents, and 3 of them, and the other focus group, the data I presented here, with mixed parents coming from mixed parents, South American, Spanish-speaking parents, French-speaking parents, as you have seen, mixed marriages. These parents are coming from. All of them pointed out this stigma of speaking a different language, which is other than English. So it really caused a certain kind of a pressure for these kids when they start their school. They find because obviously think about it, after almost 30 years of everything was closed and only they were open it to the people who are mostly coming from white backgrounds. So it's like definitely there was a colored boy was also treated differently, especially the food and all that. So very interesting scenario, Professor Singh. Possibly you can also highlight on this, because it's very interesting to see that I found that people go on their Saturdays and Sundays, the main food is Indian food, but that is not accepted when a kid brings Indian food at school, and he got treated in a different way by their colleagues because he smells and things like that. And this has also been treated in several other films, and we have seen that from based on people who are living outside as immigrants. So yeah, stigma is always there. It's unavoidable.
I would also say,
One,
Anik, that the tolerance level is very important here. You know, there are certain countries like USA. In USA, you are more tolerant towards the outsiders. In UK, you are not so tolerant toward the outsider. In spite of the fact that there are so many languages which are being spoken in England overall, this is one issue. The other issue is, you know, these children have double disadvantage. One, they look very different. Their skin, their look, their make, they're very different. And second, they speak different language. So naturally, they want to win over at least one of them, one of the handicaps. So the easy handicap to win over is that they should speak like the majority. So they would
Yeah.
immediately, immediately give up their own mother tongues and they switch over to the majority language. So that's one thing. The other thing I just wanted to point out about Irish is that Irish is also one of the best languages known for its poetry, great poetry. Particularly in India, there's a lot of Irish connection with Khasi and the other languages of the Northeast. There's a lot of give and take that has happened earlier. Anyway, other questions.
yeah, actually, there are some questions from the same attendees, Dr. Kakuli Day. She's asking another question. While we talk about the language policy being more friendly to the speaker of minority languages, what are the practical economical solution to this situation in a multilingual society like India? By economical situation, I mean how to solve the problem of implementation of so many languages as a medium of study in educational institutions. This is the one question. Another question, do you find the different minority language groups take inspiration from each other's effort to maintain their own languages, or do they perhaps feel some competition, for example, between, say, Irish and Punjabi?
Well,
And she
that's a
I think
mismatch
she has
competition.
asked on it, she has asked one more thing, like in Ali's case, who was in the UK, do you think he could be able to write the question in English if he was taught more than one language beside English in the school instead of writing it in Arabic?
Uh, is it possible, Gulab, to forward me the questions, because there are three questions and there are three very different
Uh,
ideas.
okay, let me try that.
One is
Can you see
about the
that?
economic situation. Economic
Sorry, sir?
situation in India. One is about the economic situation in India, and is it really possible to have so many languages being used in schools economically in terms of financing the whole education system? That was one
Obviously,
question.
the situation of economy is one of these handicaps, and Francois Gras and other people have been working on it for a long time, how multilingualism could be feasible in different contexts. I consider that India definitely can do it, and we have seen it in various research about the mother tongue based multilingual education, how it worked out for different other contexts. And while talking about,
Did you get the questions?
yes, I did. I
Okay.
just so it's not that how it should be feasible or economy would be the only thing. There are so many different ways to promote these languages, to maintain those languages. As I have mentioned, I have used personally, and I have seen that several other researchers. I was working in Koya language back in 2010, and I do remember they're also trying to organize several events, storytelling, our oral histories and things like that, that could also be useful to promote these languages. All we talk about is offering here at least a higher level of symbolic value to these languages and their usefulness in this context. If we don't create space for these languages will be lost, as we all know. And Professor Singh, you have also worked on several lesser known languages in your own research. And I think that there is a still possibility to include these languages. All I say that having only officiality will not guarantee a maintenance of a language, because there are several languages would be in this world, and also in India they are not at all official, but they have got a huge sustainable feature within their own community. And obviously it's an eye-opener fact of that I didn't study about Maithili as such, but what you mentioned, because being a part of the legislation, it definitely helps to elevate the status of it, and your own research on language planning also states these kind of things. But apart from this, also there is a part from the family, because if we start from the ground, if we can explain the families the value of their languages, things could much be developed. That's what I feel about this. And regarding the other questions, regarding the inspiration, I consider that definitely languages are always getting inspired from each other. In the Spanish context itself, the Galician case is, as Professor Singh mentioned a few minutes back, about Catalan and Basque. These are the these three co-official languages of Spain. They are continuously interacting with each other, although they have got very different history of development. But that, because each language is unique, we must say. But apart from that, at the same time, we can see that these languages can learn from each other, that what are the topics, that's the whole reason of we are investigating so many different contexts, because policies are context specific, that we must understand that for the very beginning. So you prepare a policy, or you try to develop a policy on the ground when it is, it may not be the same thing. A Galician speaking father in New York as an immigrant Galician, and it's not be the same a Galician speaking father in Galicia itself, because there are two different kind of value systems are working there. So we need to take into consideration these issues. But at the same time, I consider that minority language groups can definitely take experiences and share and collaborate with each other. So that is one part. And regarding the part with competition, well, the competition is always there, because one thing is the indigenous minority languages, another thing is the immigrant languages coming in. So in any language policy scenario, which is a post conflict society as it is termed, I consider that Northern Ireland still cannot be called as a post conflict society, because it happens to be that the conflict was always there, it remains there, because if we do not consider involving these languages and their cultures, there will always remain some conflict. May not be clear in the at the surface level, but it will always remain there. So it was dormant in certain contexts, because Punjabi is not taken into consideration in the Northern Irish context. But if we go to Scotland, they have got a more of an interesting language policy at present, which is called 1+2 language policy, which allows to bring in certain minority languages such as Urdu, because of the long established Pakistani population and Indians, obviously, it's a long established population of South Asians who speak Urdu. So Urdu has been included into the policy. I would also like to mention the case of Chinese, because Chinese happens to be one of the UCAT's at present most studied languages. Even British Academy is also giving a lot of support to Chinese, because Chinese has elevated its status after the government support. In this way, it has become from a community language like all others, Hindi, etc. It has become a modern language, because modern language is in the up of this a steer up in this whole hierarchy of immigrant languages in this context, because they teach French, Spanish, German as main foreign languages in the school system. So obviously Chinese is reaching that level, but the competition will always remain, because it's Chinese, Urdu, and some other languages which are included at present in 1+2 language policy is also discriminating the other languages spoken in Scotland, because there are more than 150 languages spoken, especially the case of Polish, for example. The highest number of population at present are the Polish speakers, and the Polish speaking children, they go to the schools. I did my research apart from in this mainstream schools. I did my research on the Polish speaking community and their supplementary schools, how they have organized and what kind of ideologies they have behind it. So you can see that there is a continuous tussle and negotiation going on at the level of the government and at the level on the ground, where the parents need to prepare the schools, they need to fund these schools, they need to find the funding for it. They try to do it. Unfortunately, in my own research, I couldn't find as such interest from the Indian parents, which happens to be slightly surprising for me. Maybe in other contexts it exists, because in England we know that there is a long established Indian communities, and they organize Hindi, Punjabi schools. But it is not the case in the context of Northern Ireland yet. Obviously, it has to do with the time of immigration, because not everybody came in 1950s. Recently, even when I interviewed some mother, she just recently reached, and she was happy because her kid will learn more English. So it's like there is more of an English dominance, as we can see in the context of India as well, how there is a dominance of English in the context of education. So I think there is one more questions there.
That was the last question. Over the years, after a considerable stay, they might give up MT and use English by chance. Is it
Yeah,
not
but it
visible to
depends
you?
once again at the level of what kind of value-added system we can add to these people. For example, these students, in the case of Ali, which happens to be the previous question, it's like, the school is not offering any other language. So this question would be something very fictitious at present to respond to it, because it's a specific case study in a specific situation where I was interested in more looking at what the teacher's perspective towards other languages are. So I didn't really research it from that perspective where the question comes from. I understand that the teacher there could be more tolerant. I'm not expecting too much on that ground. I would say that the teacher could be more open because she knows that this kid is coming from a different language. It's all about English politeness rather than going into and helping the kid, trying to understand what his concept or the situation is. For example, it's a very interesting thing happened in the other school, which is like I did my fieldwork in two schools. And in the other schools, there was like two girls. They're coming from a same language background. They speak a Parsi language, but in the very beginning, I was told that they speak Arabic because nobody knows that what language they speak. So they find one cheat one day because they were being ridiculed by their friends because they were in grade 7. So it's like they were like their classmates were like always being behind them talking, so you can't talk in your language, you have to speak in English because we are here, and all this kind of things. So these girls, they changed their like instead of talking to them in their language, they started writing it. So they started writing it, and there's a cheat that I found, and then I searched for it, and it came to know that they're speaking, they don't have any idea of Arabic because they are speaking Parsi. So since they couldn't speak, so they were trying to write each other. So these kind of
So
situations.
Onik, actually we are running short of time. So because I got the message from IT, the next session will be starting, the next webinar will be starting very soon. So I would like to thank Professor Yuan Singh for such opportunity and request Professor Singh to propose a vote of thanks to his speaker.
No, we just wanted to thank you, Anik, for raising our concern in the area of language planning and development. I'm sure many of us in Amity would work on language policy issues after hearing your talk. So thank you very much for being so comprehensive about the whole area, theoretically as well as from practical point of view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for having me here, and it is a real great pleasure for me to be with a group who are interested and very interesting questions. My specifically also my extended thanks to people who are hearing it and gave me such a nice questions to talk to and discuss. Have a nice day.